Blood raced down Michael Turner's forearm and dripped from his wedding ring onto the patio stones as the sirens flared at the end of the cul-de-sac, a red-blue strobe slicing the golden afternoon like a verdict. He barely felt the sting. He had just yanked a hot grill grate off the coals to stop a flare-up that leapt toward his granddaughter's stroller, and the smell of charred sugar and seared meat clung to the air while shocked neighbors stared over their hedges. Linda was already wheeling little Rosie backward, one hand on the stroller handle, the other reaching instinctively for Michael's burned wrist. And the family's laughter, just seconds old, had turned into a chorus of tight breaths and startled murmurs that trembled like a plucked wire. Across the fence, Nancy Boyd's blinds snapped shut, then cracked open again just enough for a pale eye to glint in the slat. The sirens grew louder until they weren't sound anymore but pressure against bone, an announcement not of help, but of scrutiny. And a few teenagers down the street lifted their phones to film because that is what the world does now, when it smells smoke and fear. Michael steadied his breath. The backyard that had been his haven for 20 years now felt like a stage. Flags of sunlight fluttered across the lawn, the scent of hickory wood carried on a light breeze, and the easy rhythm of a family Saturday. His family, finally together, collapsed under that bratty wail of sirens and the hot, stubborn throb in his hand. He dipped his wrist into the ice bucket they had filled with bottles earlier. The cold punched him clear, and he realized with a cold twist in his gut what those sirens meant in this particular neighborhood with this particular neighbor. Nancy had finally done it. She had called the police on a family barbecue. Linda's voice was gentle but edged with steel as she said they will be here in seconds. And Emma, their daughter, whispered that the grill had just flared. It was nothing, it happens, and Jake, their son, looked toward the street with a jaw that hardened into the shape of his father's. Michael lifted his head and saw the first cruiser roll in slow and official, careful tires kissing the curb, lights washing the trees, and behind it a second car, then a third, because when a certain kind of neighbor says disturbance and possible violence, the response is not a single polite knock. He prepared himself to be just a man at his own home answering fair questions, nothing more, nothing less. Nancy's gate creaked. She appeared in her neat blouse and prim sandals, clutching her phone like a policeman's baton, and the thin smile on her mouth had the tremble of triumph. In the sunlight, the silver chain around her neck flashed like a small blade. She stood on the property line and tried to look frightened for the officers pulling onto the curb, but fear is hard to counterfeit when a person is hungry to be right. Michael knew hunger, the way it hollows a person from the inside. He also knew the devastation of a single false report. He had written a policy on that very thing in his first week on the job. The first officer out of the cruiser was young, sharp creases in his sleeves, eyes trained to scan. He stepped through the gate with practiced caution, one hand open to calm and the other resting on a radio mic. He asked who was in charge here, not hostile, just by the book. Michael raised his uninjured hand and answered that it was his backyard and his grill and his family, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he wants the temperature down. The officer looked at him, then past him, then back again with a blink that altered the gravity of the moment. His shoulders eased and his voice lost a layer of starch as he said, "Sir, can I see some identification, please?" Michael reached into his back pocket for his wallet, flipped the flap, and with his other hand still in ice held out the card that had arrived 2 days ago, with a congratulatory letter and a key code to a new office. The officer took one look and stiffened. The line of his mouth changed. He lifted his chin toward the other two officers approaching and said, almost under his breath, "Chief." The word struck the patio with a quiet that was louder than the sirens, which had cut off the instant the engines parked. The second officer, older with the soft frown of experience, recognized Michael instantly, the way a man recognizes a face that will sign his performance review and his promotion papers or bury them. He nodded once in respect and then again, deeper in embarrassment. The third officer's eyes went wide with the sudden math of the scene. They had been called to question their new boss on his own property over a cookout, with his grandchild's stroller still rocking slightly beside the garden bench. Michael lowered his card and offered his left hand, the burned one, with a rueful apology for being less than presentable. It was a small joke aimed at rescuing dignity from the fire, but his voice held more gravel than he intended. He said there had been a quick flare. The baby was fine, everyone was fine, and that he would be happy to walk them through anything they needed to see. The young officer nodded and started to speak, but Nancy's words cut. through like a siren's return, as she declared, that the noise had been constant for hours and that she had smelled illegal substances and heard shouting and what she believed to be threats. She used words like menace and intimidation and claimed she saw a flame higher than the fence line, enough to set a tree ablaze. The older officer turned to her with professional patience. He asked if she was okay and whether she wanted to remain on her property while they spoke to the homeowner. She planted her sandals on the seam of the concrete like it was a border checkpoint. Michael felt the old ache in his chest, the one that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the quiet war between neighbors when grief curdles into grievance. He had once worked with her husband a lifetime ago in uniform and sweat, and that history hovered in the heat like a ghost. He told the officers there was no alcohol beyond a couple of beers in the cooler, no music louder than the radio hum that still drifted from the kitchen window, and no threats, unless one counted the flame that leapt when fat hit the coals. When the young officer finally spoke, his words were careful, and they hovered in the locked air as if they knew this choice would be remembered. "Chief Turner, we received a call alleging a disturbance. We still have to do a quick check." Michael nodded and said of course, and he gestured toward the patio, the grill, the cooler, the tables, the neighborhood witnesses who had already leaned into the script. The officer's eyes moved, and for a brief second Michael saw something almost like pity there, which he hated more than the suspicion. He did not want pity. He wanted the truth to be seen without his title, without the card, without the weight of a badge that could too easily be misunderstood as a shield. He was a man who loved his family and kept a careful fire, and he had the burn to prove it. Then came the pivot that rethreaded the moment. From the street, a local blogger he recognized. In that way, everyone now recognizes the faces that turn private. Moments into wider noise, stepped onto the sidewalk with a camera rig and shouted that the police were investigating their own chief. The neighbors flinched as if a second siren had sounded. Nancy lifted her chin and smiled with both sides of her mouth this time. And Michael, who had kept his face steady for decades while delivering bad news to good people and good warnings to bad ones, understood in the cold ache of his hand and the hot thrum of his yard that this was no longer a simple call. This was a beginning. The call and the confrontation. Nancy Boyd had always believed that peace could be purchased through control. Every morning she trimmed her rose bushes like they were soldiers on parade, every blade of grass lined up as if the world might respect her more if she could make it obey. Yet as the patrol cars idled outside Michael Turner's house, she felt that strange flicker of thrill, the kind that whispers finally, "Someone will listen to me." She had made the call 20 minutes earlier, her voice trembling just enough to sound afraid. "Yes, officers," she had said, pressing the phone close to her lips. "It's the Turners again." Loud shouting, smoke everywhere, something violent this time. "I'm frightened. Please hurry." And though no violence existed, she could almost hear it when she closed her eyes. Frank shouting, the slam of a door, the crack of something breaking, the memory she had never managed to bury. Now standing at the fence, Nancy folded her arms and watched the officers approach her old neighbor, like she'd waited years for this reckoning. The one she blamed for everything she'd lost. Inside the yard, Michael Turner stood composed. Decades of police training stitched composure into his every breath, but inside a tremor built behind his ribs. Not anger, something colder. Recognition. He saw it in Nancy's tight mouth and her eyes full of old storms. The years hadn't softened her. They'd fossilized her bitterness. The young officer, barely 30, cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to Nancy, "you were the complainant?" "Yes, and I stand by every word." She pointed toward the grill. "That man is reckless. He thinks because of his title he can do whatever he pleases. Look at that fire. Look at that noise." Her tone carried satisfaction disguised as civic duty. The officer nodded but didn't take notes. His eyes slid to Michael again. "Chief Turner, sir. I didn't realize." Michael cut him off with a calm wave of his hand. "You're doing your job, son. Keep doing it." He stepped forward, his shadow stretching long across the fence as the sun began to lower behind the maples. "Nancy, was it really necessary to call the police? You could have walked across the yard and told me you were uncomfortable." Nancy's throat tightened. "You wouldn't have listened," she said, her voice breaking somewhere between rage and memory. "You never do." The line caught Michael off guard. "Never do?" He studied her face, the faint tremor in her lip, the strain around her eyes, and a buried name stirred in his mind. Frank Boyd. "Your husband." he began quietly, her chin lifted like a shield. Don't speak his name. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The air between the two houses thickened, full of years they hadn't discussed, words unsaid, grief unhealed. Michael sighed. Nancy, I'm sorry for how things ended back then. But Frank, she snapped. He was a good man until you ruined him. Her voice cut through the warm evening like glass through silk. The neighbors watching from porches froze mid-whisper. The young officer looked suddenly uncomfortable, realizing this was not a simple noise complaint, it was something older, heavier. Michael stepped closer, careful but firm. Frank made his own choices. I didn't want to file that report. You know that. I had no choice. Nancy's laugh was dry, bitter. No choice? You could have protected him. You could have turned away like they all did. But you wanted your promotion, didn't you? The words landed hard. For a moment, Michael felt his composure waver, just enough for Linda, standing behind him, to reach for his arm. She knew that tone. It was an accusation wrapped in grief, and it never healed easily. But before Michael could answer, another voice joined in. Excuse me, Chief, the older officer said, his tone uneasy. We need to report this call in. It's on record now. You'll have to come down to the station later for a brief statement. Just formality. Michael nodded slowly. He understood protocol. But he also knew Nancy would enjoy watching him walk that humiliating line between authority and accusation. She smiled faintly. Justice has a way of coming home, doesn't it, Chief? The remark slid under his skin like a splinter. He had heard that same tone years ago, the night Frank Boyd was escorted out of the precinct in handcuffs, shouting that Michael Turner had stabbed him in the back. For a moment, the memory returned vividly. The flash of the badge, the shaking hands, the word friend losing all meaning. Linda's voice broke through, soft but trembling. Michael, please, let's go inside. You don't owe anyone this argument. But Michael didn't move. His gaze stayed on Nancy, not with anger, but something deeper. Sorrow, maybe even guilt. You can't keep living like this, he said. Frank's gone. Hating me won't bring him back. Nancy's lips trembled. No, but it makes the nights quieter, she whispered. The officers exchanged looks, unsure whether to intervene or just witness the strange theater of justice and grief unraveling before them. The young one finally stepped in, murmuring something about clearing the area. As the cruisers began to roll away, their lights fading into the dusk, a quiet settled over the street. But it wasn't peace. It was tense, humming and unseen, like a wire stretched too tight. Nancy turned toward her house, but not before murmuring to herself, You think you've buried the past, Michael, but it's still alive, and it's coming for you. Inside the Turner home, Linda shut the door softly. The family sat in silence, the smell of burnt barbecue lingering like guilt. From outside, faint laughter drifted from Nancy's porch. For the first time in years, Michael Turner felt something he hadn't felt since his days as a detective, a sense that this wasn't over, that something dark had just been set in motion, and this time, it was aimed straight at him. And as the night fell over the quiet suburban street, the faint glow from Nancy's window flickered, not steady like a lamp, but rhythmic, deliberate like someone tapping on glass from the inside, reminding the living that the dead never truly rest. The hidden history sleep didn't come easily that night. The house that usually breathed warmth now carried a strange hush, as if the walls themselves were listening. Michael lay awake, eyes tracing the ceiling shadows while the soft ticking of the clock grew louder with every second. Outside, wind rattled the branches, whispering against the window like an old friend trying to speak. He could still see Nancy's face. Those eyes that had once sparkled with neighborly kindness now hollowed by years of suspicion. He had thought time would heal that wound. He was wrong. Downstairs, Linda moved quietly through the kitchen, her reflection wavering in the dark window glass. She poured herself a cup of tea she wouldn't drink, her hands trembling just slightly. When Michael came down the stairs, she looked up, searching his face. You didn't tell me it was her who called, she said softly. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. Didn't want to drag it up again, but she's dragging it anyway, Linda replied. You can't outrun the past, Michael. Especially not that one. He nodded, eyes distant. I know. The kitchen clock clicked past midnight. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Linda's voice broke the stillness. What really happened all those years ago? You've never told me everything. Michael looked toward the window where the faint reflection of the grill still stood, a ghost of the day's disaster. It was 15 years ago, he began, his voice low like gravel over water. Frank Boyd was one of ours. Good cop, brave. But he had a weakness, gambling. Started small poker nights after shift. Then debts piled up. He borrowed from the wrong people. Some of them we were investigating. Linda's hand stilled on the cup. Oh no, yeah, Michael said. We caught wind of it. I was his supervisor then. I tried to help him, cover what I could, warn him. But one night a bust went wrong. A tip we were supposed to keep sealed leaked out. A dealer got away and one of our men got shot. We traced the leak to Frank's phone. I confronted him. He swore it wasn't him and said someone had set him up. He paused, the memory pressing heavy on his chest. Internal affairs came down hard. Evidence pointed to Frank. They found envelopes of cash in his locker, reports he never filed. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to sign the file. That signature ended his career, Linda whispered, and his life. Michael nodded slowly. He took his own life 3 months later. Nancy never forgave me. She said I destroyed him to climb ranks. Truth is, I begged the department to give him another chance. But the chief then, Harris, made sure Frank never got one. Linda blinked. Deputy Harris? The same one still in the department? Same man, Michael said. He was a captain then. He said we had to make an example of Frank to protect the force's image. I didn't realize until years later that Harris had his own reasons to bury the case quickly. He leaned forward, voice lower. Frank knew something about him, something dirty. He told me once over a drink that Harris was skimming from confiscated cash during raids. But before he could show me proof, everything fell apart. Then Frank was gone and the evidence disappeared. Linda's eyes widened. You think Harris framed him? I can't prove it, Michael said, but I've always suspected. Outside, a faint creak sounded near the fence, too deliberate to be the wind. Michael turned toward the sound, instincts kicking in. He moved to the back door and flicked on the patio light. The yard glowed pale and empty, but the gate latch was hanging loose. Someone had been there. He stepped outside, scanning the shadows. His own reflection shimmered on the metal of the grill. Then he noticed something on the table, something that hadn't been there before. A small folded note weighed down by a stone. He picked it up. The handwriting was unfamiliar but careful, letters slanted and strong. You were right, Chief. The wrong man paid the price. Some debts never die. Michael froze. There was no signature, no clue. Just those words. His pulse quickened. The only people who could know about that case were inside the department. Or the dead. Linda stood at the doorway, her voice trembling. What is it? He tucked the note into his pocket. Nothing. Probably a prank, but his tone betrayed him. Later, after she went upstairs, Michael sat alone in the dark, the note between his fingers. He replayed every face from that time. Every officer, every whisper, every report that didn't add up. Harris's smug smile at Frank's hearing. Nancy's scream in the courthouse when the verdict fell. The coffin lowered into the ground while rain soaked her black dress. He had thought it was over. But now something was stirring again. Someone wanted him to remember. The next morning, the neighborhood woke to find a police cruiser parked outside Michael's home. Not because of Nancy this time, but because someone had broken into the evidence archives downtown. Nothing stolen except one thing, the Boyd file. When the call came in, Michael's blood went cold. He sat in silence, realizing that the past wasn't just haunting him anymore. It was walking straight toward his front door. And somewhere, behind closed blinds, Nancy Boyd smiled faintly into her coffee, the corners of her lips trembling with something that wasn't quite satisfaction. Or remorse. She had found the strength to dig into old wounds, and she wasn't the only one looking for redemption. Someone else, somewhere in the shadows, was rewriting the truth of Frank Boyd's death. And this time Michael Turner wouldn't just be haunted by it. He'd be dragged straight into it. The neighborhood turns by morning. The peaceful suburb that had once been Michael Turner's refuge had become a stage of whispers and stares. The world seemed smaller now, like the sky itself leaned in to listen. News trucks parked at the edge of Maple Ridge Lane, their antennas reaching like skeletal arms into the cloudy sky. Someone had leaked the story. Police chief under internal review after neighborhood disturbance. It wasn't even accurate, but accuracy didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the story had teeth, and once it bit, it didn't let go. Linda watched through the curtains as a camera crew set up by the sidewalk. "They're vultures," she muttered. "They don't even know what they're feeding on." Michael didn't answer. He sat at the table, uniform jacket folded beside him, reading the email from the mayor's office for the 5th time. The words "temporary administrative leave pending review" glared up at him. His pulse throbbed in his temples, each beat louder than the next. When he finally looked up, his eyes were tired but sharp. "They're suspending me." Linda froze. "What? For what reason?" He placed the letter down gently. "Public perception. They say it's to maintain trust. Someone in the department leaked that the call came from Nancy Boyd, that it was related to an unresolved disciplinary case." Linda covered her mouth. "Frank's case," Michael nodded. "And that means someone inside wants this to resurface." Outside, a neighbor, Mrs. Platt, pretended to water her plants, glancing over every few seconds. The Turners had lived here for 2 decades, shared holidays, barbecues, block parties. But now smiles were replaced with silence. That's how rumors worked. They didn't need proof, only oxygen. By noon, the front gate clicked open and a man in a gray suit approached. Deputy Harris. His presence alone turned the air heavy. He was a decade younger than Michael, but carried himself like someone who'd waited a lifetime to be older. "Chief," he said with that polished grin that had never reached his eyes. "Rough day, huh?" Michael stood. "What do you want, Harris?" "Just checking on an old friend." He leaned on the fence, casual, predatory. "Word travels fast. Thought you might want to know Internal Affairs is reopening the Boyd file. Strange, huh? After all these years." Michael's stare didn't waver. "You leaked it," Harris chuckled softly. "Oh, come on. Don't flatter yourself. The department's just cleaning the house. You know how these things go." Linda stepped closer, protective. "Cleaning the house by framing my husband again?" Harris smiled politely, ignoring her. "The world's changed, Chief. People love a scandal more than a hero now. Careful not to give them both." When he turned and walked away, Michael noticed something in his hand. A folded piece of paper, same color, same handwriting as the note from last night. He slipped it into his coat pocket, a gesture meant to be seen. That evening, the air grew electric with unease. The local news station ran a segment titled "Smoke Behind the Badge." Nancy Boyd appeared on camera, her voice trembling just enough for sympathy. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she said, eyes glistening. "But sometimes truth comes at a price." Linda gasped. "She's lying on television now?" Michael sat motionless. His phone buzzed again and again, calls from officers, friends, reporters, but he didn't answer. Then one text arrived from an unknown number. "If you want the truth, come alone, midnight, 241 Ashmont Road." The address hit him like ice water. That was the old precinct storage building, abandoned for years, condemned after a fire. Only one kind of person would use that place for a meeting. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Linda caught the look in his eyes. "You're not going." He squeezed her hand. "If there's even a chance it's about Frank." "I have to." The drive through the rain felt endless. Streetlights bent and blurred through the windshield, and every reflection looked like a memory. When he reached Ashmont Road, the building loomed like a carcass of the past. Windows shattered, door chained but pried open. He stepped inside, a flashlight cutting through the dust. The air smelled of mildew and old secrets. On the far desk sat another envelope. His name was written in thick ink, Michael Turner. He tore it open. Inside were photocopies, pages from the original Boyd investigation. But they were altered. Handwritten notes in the margins read, "Evidence fabricated. Source H." His pulse spiked. H. Harris. He scanned the pages, realizing they proved what he'd long suspected. Harris had planted evidence to frame Frank Boyd. It was the smoking gun. But as he turned the last page, his flashlight beam froze on something behind the desk. 2 fresh footprints in the dust, leading toward the back door. Someone had been there moments ago. Then a sound. A click. Soft metallic. A camera shutter? "Oh, a safety latch on a gun." Michael froze. "Who's there?" No answer. He turned slowly toward the shadow near the door. The beam caught the edge of a figure, tall, wearing a hood. "You shouldn't have come," the voice said. It was low, distorted. "They're watching everything now. You're not the hero you think you are." Michael took a step forward. "Who are you?" The figure threw something toward him, small, metallic. It clattered across the floor. A flash drive, wrapped in tape. "Find the truth before they find you," the voice said, and then vanished into the rain. Michael stood there, chest heaving, the flash drive in his palm glowing faintly under his flashlight. He didn't know what it contained, but he knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. This wasn't about a barbecue anymore. When he stepped back into his car, headlights flared from behind, blinding him. He turned the ignition, but the rearview mirror caught a figure standing by the building's entrance. Nancy Boyd, watching. And this time, she wasn't holding a phone. She was holding something that looked like a badge. "The truth comes out," rain hammered the windshield as Michael gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles bone white. The flash drive on the passenger seat glimmered each time lightning flared across the sky, as if alive, pulsing with the weight of whatever truth it carried. He couldn't shake Nancy's image from his mind, standing in that ruin, face cold and unreadable, holding a badge that wasn't hers. What was she doing there? Was she helping him or leading him into a trap? When he finally pulled into his driveway, the street was silent. The news vans were gone, but the ghosts of their camera flashes still seemed to flicker in his memory. Linda rushed out under an umbrella, fear etched across her face. "Michael, where were you?" "I called 3 times. He stepped past her, soaked and pale. "I found something," he said simply, and held up the flash drive. Inside, as thunder rolled, he plugged it into his laptop. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared, labeled Internal Affairs, Boyd Case, sealed. He opened it. The screen filled with scanned documents, emails, and surveillance photos. One image froze him. A grainy shot of Harris counting cash in a precinct evidence room. Another, Frank Boyd handing over a file. Date stamped 2 days before his arrest. Linda leaned closer. "That's Frank. What's he giving him?" Michael clicked open the next document. It was a transcript, an anonymous complaint filed against Harris for unethical seizure practices and evidence tampering. The signature line was blurred, but the initials beneath it read FB. Frank reported him. Michael whispered. He tried to expose Harris. That's why he was framed. Lightning cracked outside, thunder rolling like distant gunfire. Linda covered her mouth. "Oh my God. Harris destroyed him to save himself." Michael sat back, heart pounding. "And I signed the damn report that made it possible." The weight of that truth pressed down on him until his shoulders trembled. All those years he'd carried guilt for doing the right thing, never realizing that the right thing had been poisoned before it reached his desk. Then another file blinked open by itself, as if triggered. It was a video, old and grainy security footage from the precinct. Frank sat in an interrogation room, staring at the table. The timestamp was from the night before he died. A voice off camera, Harris's, said, "You should have kept quiet, Frank. You're going to take the fall and your friend Turner can't save you." Frank's response was faint but clear. "He'll find out one day. You can bury a man, Harris, but you can't bury the truth." The screen went black. Linda's breath caught. He knew. Michael's hands shook. The truth wasn't buried, it had been waiting. And now it was out. Before he could process it, a sharp knock shattered the quiet. He turned. At the window stood Nancy Boyd, rain dripping from her coat, eyes wild and glistening. Linda flinched. "Oh, not again." But Nancy's voice was desperate, not vengeful. "Please, Michael, let me in. I know who sent you there tonight." Against Linda's protest, Michael opened the door. Nancy stepped inside, trembling, her hair plastered to her face. "It was Harris," she said before he could speak. "He sent you that message. He wanted to know if you'd take the bait, if you'd go after the truth." Michael's pulse spiked. "Why would he?" "Because he's scared," Nancy said, her voice cracking. "I went to Internal Affairs last week. I told them I thought Frank was innocent. I even showed them the letter Frank left me before he died. But someone broke into my house the next day and stole it. Only Harris and you knew it existed." She pulled something from her coat pocket, a torn piece of paper, edges burnt. "This is all I could save." Michael unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, fading, but readable. "Nancy, if you're reading this, I failed to stop them. They're taking everything. Don't blame Turner, he's the only honest one left. I'm sorry I dragged him into my mess. Tell him he was right." Tears welled in Nancy's eyes. "I hated you for years, Michael. I thought you destroyed him, but it wasn't you, it was Harris. He killed him as surely as if he'd pulled the trigger himself." Linda exhaled, her voice barely a whisper. So all this, everything you've done, Nancy nodded, was built on a lie. I thought I was getting justice for Frank, but I was helping the wrong man. Michael turned toward the laptop screen again, where the final document blinked open automatically, a live feed from an internal IP address. The cursor began typing by itself as if someone on the other end was watching. You're too late, Chief. Michael's blood ran cold. Then before he could react, the house lights flickered and died. The laptop screen went black. From outside came the low growl of a car engine idling. Headlights cut through the curtains, sweeping across the room like a predator's gaze. Nancy backed away from the window. That's him, she whispered. Harris. Michael reached for his phone, but there was no signal. The rain pounded harder, muffling every sound except the slow approach of footsteps on wet gravel. Linda's voice shook. Michael, what do we do? He moved toward the hallway closet and retrieved his old service pistol, the one he hadn't used since retirement. We do what we should have done years ago, he said, checking the chamber. We finished this. The front door rattled once, twice, then silence. Nancy's breathing hitched. He won't stop, Michael. You have to expose him before he exposes you. Michael's gaze hardened. He already has. Lightning flashed again, illuminating 3 figures outside through the glass. 2 officers flanking a man in a gray suit, standing motionless in the storm. Harris. His silhouette tilted its head, as if in mock salute. Michael tightened his grip on the gun. The past and the present had finally collided on his doorstep, and one way or another, by the next dawn the truth would cost someone their life, forgiveness and healing. The storm reached its breaking point, a relentless roar against the Turner house as thunder rolled across the horizon like a warning drum. Every flash of lightning cast sharp silhouettes through the windows. Harris standing motionless outside, 2 armed officers beside him. The street, once quiet and familiar, now looked like a battlefield between truth and deceit. Michael stood in the center of the living room, gun steady in his hand, every instinct honed by decades of service screaming for restraint. Linda gripped his arm, trembling, whispering, Please don't do this. Let the truth speak, not the gun. But the truth, Michael thought bitterly, had been speaking for 15 years and no one had listened. Nancy hovered near the window, pale and shaking. Her voice was thin, cracked by fear and remorse. He won't arrest you, Michael. He'll kill you. Harris doesn't clean up messes, he buries them. Then came the knock, slow, calm. 3 deliberate taps that sounded more like a dare than a request. Michael opened the door halfway, rain sprang across the floor. Harris stood there, hat brim dripping, his smirk unbothered by the downpour. Evening, Chief, he said with quiet venom. We need to talk. Michael's jaw tightened. You're trespassing. I'm investigating, Harris replied, stepping forward until the muzzle of Michael's pistol pressed against his chest. Put that down. You don't want your neighbors seeing you like this again, do you? Michael's finger trembled on the trigger. You framed Frank Boyd. You used my report to destroy him. I've got the evidence now, Harris chuckled. You've got copies of evidence that disappeared from a sealed archive. Who do you think they'll believe? You, the suspended chief with a neighborhood scandal, or me, the man cleaning up your mess? The words slithered through the air like poison. Behind Harris, lightning revealed the 2 officers shifting uneasily, their hands near their holsters but their eyes unsure. Nancy stepped forward, clutching Frank's letter to her chest. He's lying. Frank wrote this before he died. He knew Harris was dirty. He knew. Harris turned his cold gaze on her. Mrs. Boyd, I suggest you be careful. False statements can ruin lives. Her voice broke but held steady. You already ruined mine. Harris's smirk faltered for the first time. You think anyone cares what you believe? You were a grieving widow screaming at walls for years. Maybe, she said, eyes blazing, but tonight I'm not screaming alone. She handed the letter to Michael, who stepped back and lifted the flash drive from his pocket. Everything's here. Documents, footage, proof of your thefts and frame jobs. I sent copies to the press before you got here. For the first time, Harris's expression cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes darted to the officers behind him. You're bluffing. Michael's voice was calm, resolute. Try me. The younger officer, one of the 2 flanking Harris, stepped forward uncertainly. Sir, is this true? Stand down, Harris barked, but the officer didn't move. His partner looked between them, uncertain whom to follow. In that small hesitation, the illusion of Harris's control shattered. Michael lowered his weapon slightly. You used the system to destroy good men, Harris. But the system remembers. You can bury the truth, but you can't keep it dead. Suddenly, Harris lunged, his hand flashing toward his holster. The room exploded in noise, a sharp crack that split the storm. Linda screamed. The officers drew their weapons, shouting commands that blurred into chaos. Then silence. Harris lay on the floor, his gun still in his hand but unfired, blood pooling near the entryway. Michael's pistol smoked faintly. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of justice delivered too late. Nancy fell to her knees, sobbing. He got what he gave Frank, she whispered. Michael lowered the weapon slowly, eyes glassy. No, he said quietly. Nobody wins like this. The officer secured the scene, calling for backup. But one of them, a young man with a haunted look, turned to Michael and said softly, "We saw everything. He drew first, Chief. You did what you had to." Michael didn't respond. He walked out into the rain, letting it soak him, letting it wash away 15 years of guilt and ghosts. Nancy followed, her umbrella forgotten, her tears lost in the storm. She stopped beside him. "Frank always said you were the only man who still believed in doing right," she murmured. "I didn't listen. I'm sorry." He turned to her, weary but gentle. "You don't owe me an apology. You just owe yourself peace." The next morning broke clear and golden, as if the storm had taken all its anger with it. News reports confirmed Harris's corruption. The files leaked to the press and verified. Frank Boyd's name was cleared publicly, his badge restored posthumously. The department held a press conference, with Michael reinstated but declining the role. He stood outside the station that day, hands in his pockets, staring at the rising sun. Linda joined him quietly. "You could stay on," she said. Michael smiled faintly. "Justice isn't a job, Linda. It's a debt we pay every day. I finally paid mine." Across the street, Nancy placed a bouquet beneath the memorial wall bearing Frank's name. When she saw Michael, she smiled, not in bitterness, but in peace. For the first time in 15 years, there was no hate in her eyes. That weekend, the Turners hosted another barbecue. The same yard, same grill, same summer light, but everything felt different. Neighbors who once whispered now brought food and laughter. Even Nancy showed up carrying a plate of homemade pie. As the fire crackled and children's laughter filled the air, Michael looked around, the peace in the small things, the healing in forgiveness. He raised his glass and said, "Sometimes justice doesn't come from punishment. It comes from the courage to forgive what almost destroyed you." The crowd fell silent, the words sinking deep. Then came the sound of clinking glasses, the smell of hickory, and the soft laughter of a community reborn. The camera of memory panned upward, sunlight streaming through the trees, catching the faint gleam of Frank's old police badge now mounted above the Turners' patio, a reminder that truth, though buried, always finds its way home. And in that moment, under a sky finally cleared of storms, peace felt like justice was fulfilled. The end.